All right, it's 12:30, so we'll go ahead and get going. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Captain Chris Rimp. I'm the acting director of the Naval Academy Museum. Welcome to the Naval Academy Museum. It's great to see such a nice turnout for the first of our fall series of the Shifley Lectures. The Vice Admiral Ralph Shifley Lectures are named in honor of Vice Admiral Shifley, who was a naval aviator during the Second World War in the Pacific. And it is funded through the endowment of the class of 1950 in his honor. And as always, we are grateful to the class of 1950 and to the member classes of our museum syndicate who so graciously endow the great things that we are able to do here at the museum on a daily basis. And the talk that you're about to hear today is one of them. We have lots of ways that we spend our endowment money at the museum. Some of them aren't very fun. There are things like buying new video monitors, conserving our artifacts, taking care of them, buying alarm systems, the sort of things that you have to do to run a museum. But if you ask any of us, the number one thing that we would like to do with our money is spend it on students, and that is precisely what this presentation is about. Over this summer, the Naval Academy Museum, through our endowment funds, was able to fund the travel of Captain Marko Stawnyczyj and 6, I believe, midshipmen to Guantanamo Bay, to the site of the Battle of Cuzco Well, where they were able to participate in some hands-on history, bringing the stuff that we teach them into the classrooms, into the real world, and allowing them to actually experience it. I'm not going to talk very much about that. I don't want to take away any of Captain Stawnyczyj's talk. He will tell you plenty about the Battle of Cuzco Well. Captain Stawnyczyj's been with the history department now for 2 years. He comes to us, he is a combat engineer by background, and doing fantastic things with our midshipmen in the history department, and this is just an excellent example of that. So without further ado, Marko, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Captain Marko Stawnyczyj, and I'm actually thrilled to have this opportunity to speak to you about this trip that we took to Guantanamo Bay this summer. But prior to kicking it off, while you read over the agenda, there's some people that we definitely need to thank, because this was not a one-person show. It took a lot of different people, a lot of agencies to make this happen. Most importantly, with Claude Broby, the museum director, for listening to me and believing that this is something that we can do. Captain Renfro for continuing on with the support, and also with Tracy Logan, making sure I don't touch the artifacts with my bare hands and making sure they're properly preserved. Michael McCord, who's with the staff at the environmental office in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. We reached out to them and they were very receptive to it. They basically cut all the red tape that we needed to. Well, made sure we filled it out the proper way. We didn't cut anything. So we were able to conduct a survey in Guantanamo Bay. But also Daryl Gundrum from Naval Facilities Command Southeast with the historical division there. And he pretty much pointed us in the right direction on where to go on this battlefield. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but he was crucial. The International Programs Office here, Angela Yu, who's not here, but she helped put this together, and Mary Alice Ross definitely helped us with a lot of hoops that we had to jump through, and she was critical in getting us there and back. And most importantly, she's not here today, is Hannah Smith, who was the project archaeologist. Without her, we probably would have been swinging machetes and metal detectors at each other, reenacting the battle instead of actually looking for something. And for just on this slide here, I'll basically be covering this part. And then Midshipman Second Class Joshua Walton will then cover the survey results. He'll do the big reveal. And so big question is, why are we conducting an archaeological survey in Guantanamo Bay? Well, this was a battle that occurred on June 14th of 1898. And at the time that it occurred, the unit spent more time parading in the United States than it did campaigning. They were a huge hit. They were throughout newspapers, all over the country, and people wanted to see them. And from this battle, you had 2 future commandants of the Marine Corps, 2 Congressional Medal of Honor recipients, and not many of us know anything about it. I didn't know anything about it. Only reason I learned about it was I was stationed at Guantanamo Bay with the Security Force Company from 2002 to 2005. And one of the things that we would do would be something called a Cuzco Wells run. I obviously start at the point from where the Marines launched off, but in true Marine fashion, we had to run just to get there. So we added a couple extra miles on that. But we would retrace the steps of Captain Elliot's main effort. And while we'd be running through the hills, you'd see shell casings all over the ground. You would see that the artifacts were still there. And shortly after returning back to the United States, I learned about this battle. So I went to museums, like, I learned something new. Let me check this out. And there's nothing. Or if there is something, it's very scant coverage, as if it was just a blip. So after a while, I end up at the Naval Academy here, and I'm in the museum, and I see a display on Santiago de Cuba, but nothing on Cuzco Wells. And that's when I brought up the idea to Claude Berube about that. He said, all right, put it together. Tell me what you want to do. And that's where we started off with that. So then I contacted Michael McCord in Guantanamo Bay, who then worked with us so we can get access to the base and to certain parts. But what was important with Darrell Gundrum was, my idea was to go to where Captain Elliot's main effort was, where I've seen all this stuff, right? And he told me, kind of popped my bubble, says, hey, we already did this in 2013, 2014. We had a survey crew come through here. So originally, I'm dejected. But the next sentence, he says, hey, on the eastern side, we haven't done anything, and you can add to the historiography by checking out Lieutenant McGill's route. So that's where we were sent, and it was actually important because the midshipmen were now able to learn how to actually put together a good archaeological survey that'll add to the historiography. So we had some research goals. Was to identify Lieutenant McGill's firing line, and we'll see a little bit more of that. Identify the path that he took to occupy that firing line, and also in the way over there, he destroyed a Spanish heliograph station. So we're also going to try to find remnants of that heliograph station and see if there's anything to show where it was. And most importantly also, have the midshipmen gain appreciation of avenues of approach and terrain, and how studying past battles can improve current tactics, techniques, and procedures. So, all right, the creation of the 1st Marine Brigade. A lot of times we hear Marines are expeditionary force in readiness, already floating on ships and ready to go and take the fight to the enemy all across the world, but not in 1898. In 1898, they're on ship's guards duty, and they're also in different barracks throughout the United States. And what happens, so what we do know with the Spanish-American War is, on the 15th of February, the USS Maine sinks, and on April 25th, the United States declared war against Spain. We know this, but what happened in between? A lot of us are familiar with Admiral Dewey and preparing his Asiatic squadron for its fight in Manila Bay. But on the 13th of April, Rear Admiral Sampson recognizes that he's going to need Marines to seize territory on the coast of Cuba to support blockading operations. So what he does on the 13th of April, he sends a letter to the Secretary of the Navy, who the Assistant Secretary of the Navy at the time, Theodore Roosevelt, orders the Commandant of the Marine Corps, Colonel Commandant Haywood, to form 2 battalions of Marines to seize these bases in support of blockading operations. In turn, on the 17th of April, Lieutenant Colonel Huntington is the man that's put in charge. Lieutenant Colonel Huntington is a Civil War veteran. He fought at the Battle of Bull Run, and he experienced the rout that they had because of the lack of preparation. So this is the 17th of April, and oh, by the way, his unit's going to leave on the 22nd of April. So he's getting deja vu of Bull Run all over again. And so what they do is they sail from the Brooklyn Navy Yard. The Marines are assembled from all the different bases from Philadelphia up to Rhode Island. They meet at Brooklyn, at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and then they sail to Key West. They get to Key West around the 29th of April, and throughout May, they spend some time training ashore. How to fight in formation, how to be familiar with their weapons, how to be familiar with their cannons. So they get some familiarization in combat tactics. Then on the 7th of June, they're ordered to sail and join the blockading squadron of Santiago de Cuba. They arrive there on the 10th, in the morning of the 10th, and after the morning of the 10th, they're told, now report to Guantanamo Bay, and they arrived there around 1300. Now the battalion, when it was created, originally it was supposed to be 2 battalions, but because of the numbers, at the start of the war, the Marine Corps had 37 officers and 2,900 enlisted men. The battalion itself, since it was reinforced, had 6 companies. They had 623 enlisted men and 23 officers. So they had just about almost all the officers of the Marine Corps within that battalion. So while the Marines were sailing on the 10th, from the 7th to the 10th, Commander McCulloch, who McCulloch Hill is named after, was conducting some naval operations here against Spanish gunboats and fortifications. And what he did is he sent a Marine contingent to survey where's the best place to put a hill. Not a hill, but a best place to put a defense that can still be underneath the cover of naval gunfire. And they chose this site right here, McCulloch Hill. So when the Marine battalion arrives on the 10th of June at 1300, they begin disembarking onto from the ships to McCulloch Hill. Now, what starts to happen over the Battle of Cuzco Well? So they land on the 10th. They begin to fortify their positions. They set pickets out to what's known as the Crossroads area here. And on the 17th, it's as you were on the 10th of June, it's pretty quiet. On the 11th of June at 1700, the Marines start to make contact. And what happens is the Spanish hacienda is located here. Within Caminero, the Spanish have around 6,000 troops. Marines land with 623. And in this area alone, there's 500. There's 4 companies of Spanish regulars and 2 companies of Spanish guerrillas, or Cuban guerrillas. So what happens is they use this route here to basically attack the Marines at McCulloch Hill. Well, there's 2 privates that are posted on sentry duty here. It's kind of like 2 privates guarding I-95, right? And unfortunately, they're the first casualties of the battle. So at 1700, they're killed, and then the Marine Hill starts to, or McCulloch Hill, starts to receive sporadic attacks throughout the evening. During that fighting, the battalion surgeon is killed, and in the next fight's fighting, the sergeant major is killed. So basically what the fighting from the 11th through the 13th, the way it's categorized is with skirmishing actions and repulsing different assaults against McCulloch Hill. Well, things change on the 12th, and what's important on the 12th is a Cuban Lieutenant Colonel Tomas, with 60 Cubans shows up to McCulloch Hill, and he informs Lieutenant Colonel Elliot about that Spanish force. And he says the reason that they're there is that's the only source of fresh water for 9 to 12 miles. And if you're able to destroy that well, you're going to get rid of these harassing forces. And Lieutenant Colonel Elliot, in his after actions, gives Lieutenant Colonel Thomas credit for devising the plan and the Marines for executing it. So on the 14th, after repulsing another attack against the hill, the Marines begin to move out to attack the hill. What they're going to do in charge of the column is going to be Captain Elliot of Company C, and Company D is going to be with them, who's under the command of Captain Spicer. They're going to march with approximately 225 Marines and 50 Cuban allies. So they're going to march down this path, and around this area, Lieutenant Lucas with 32 Marines is going to break off, and there's some high ground over here. And what his goal is to try to cut off the Spanish sentries from finding out about this envelopment element right here. He's not successful in it. The Spanish spot them, and they have to try to hurry up and try to occupy the high ground before the Spanish do. So as the Marines start ascending this hill, close to around 1100, they already hear Lieutenant Lucas's troops engaging in a firefight. As they ascend the hill, they receive some sporadic fire, and then they're able to drive the Spanish off of this first point to the higher point of Hill 400. The Marines then occupy Hill 400 and then form a firing line pretty much on these ridges right here. And this is known to us because at previous survey I was able to find archaeological evidence of these firing lines there. What's not known is about Lieutenant Lucas. This hill here was part of a previous archaeological survey, and it was disturbed, and basically the dirt was taken away during Cold War renovations. And there's really nothing to be identified here. So what we are not sure is if he occupied this hill in this area or if he's able to join the main effort on this side of the slope. For our unit, Lieutenant McGill, what we do know is that he starts off at the Crossroads. That's his post. Once he hears gunfire in the Cuzco Hills, he leaves with a force of 50 Marines and 10 Cuban allies, and he follows this road through what's known as Happy Valley. As he goes to this area, he ascends the highest hill and destroys the Heliograph station. Basically, that's so they can't communicate back to Caminero City and let them know what's happening, so the main force isn't aware of this attack that's taking place. He destroys the Heliograph station, and what we also do know is that he descends to the south and occupies a ridge to the north of the Spanish hacienda. We know that he does that. What we also know is that in the course of the battle, Private Fitzgerald is told to signal the USS Dolphin to begin shelling the Spanish position to provide naval gunfire support. They do that. But what's not known is where is Lieutenant McGill's force at that time? Some sources say that he is on the hill providing fire into the side of envelops the Spanish, fires into them, causing to flee, and then the naval gunfire pushes him off of the hill. Other sources say that it prevents him from occupying the hill. So that's where the questions come about. And what we also do know is at the end of the fight, it's over around 1500, and at the end of everything, we have 60 Spanish that are killed in action, 120 wounded, 17 men are taken prisoner, as well as 1 lieutenant. So basically, that gets us to our big question with the conflicting narratives. Where was Lieutenant McGill's platoon when the Dolphin opened fire, and what was the unit's role in the battle? So to give the reveal and answer these questions is going to be Midshipman 2nd Class Joshua Walton.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Joshua Walton, and I'll be going over the results of our survey and the big so what. So why did we conduct this research in Guantanamo? A good place to start is, just as Captain was talking about, where exactly was Lieutenant McGill's line, and what exactly did he do on the afternoon of June 14th? So the best place to start is to establish what we know that all primary source accounts agree on. And what those are that Lieutenant McGill occupied this ridge, this north-south ridge, where I will hereby refer to as the ridge, between the Heliograph station and the Spanish hacienda at some point during the battle, and established a firing line. The second point is that the USS Dolphin, stationed off the Spanish hacienda, provided naval gunfire support to the Marines throughout the battle. Third, we know the Spanish were forced to retreat because of the Marine position or possibly the naval gunfire. And four, we know that Lieutenant McGill incurred 0 casualties throughout the engagement. So that brings me to my first side of the story. This was perpetrated by author Stephen Crane, who happened to be present at the battle. He was watching, and he says that the first thing that happened is after Lieutenant McGill moved out from the Heliograph station, is that he occupied this ridge here, whereupon he fired westwards in crossfire with the main effort between Captain Elliot and Lieutenant Lucas, and enveloped the enemy. However, he was hindered by fire from the USS Dolphin, but not before the Spanish retreated because of they thought they were being enveloped, and because of that they retreated. And the naval gunfire support from the USS Dolphin, while also shelling the Spanish position, was started to shell Lieutenant McGill's position, and this caused him to not be able to follow the Spanish and therefore failed to envelop the enemy. The second account comes from Colonel Huntington, the Marine After Action Report. He maintains that Lieutenant McGill came down from the Heliograph station, descended southward along the ridge, whereupon the USS Dolphin opened fire with naval gunfire support. And it was this factor that prevented Lieutenant McGill from getting into position on the ridge and firing and completely enveloping the enemy. So what we know happens is Sergeant Quick signals to the USS Dolphin and lifts fire, and this allowed the Spanish to retreat, as well as Lieutenant McGill to entrench, or at least to take a fighting position down, and fire eastward towards the enemy as they were retreating down this road. So in the end result, we know that they were able to take 17 Spaniards prisoner and 1 lieutenant. So the archaeological evidence supports the Marines' account of the Battle of Cuzco Well. So there's 3 to 4 major reasons, and the first is that Lieutenant McGill obtained 0 casualties throughout the engagement. And as you can tell from these results, it might be a little unclear, but these are 6mm Navy Lee shells that the Marines were firing at the enemy throughout the battle, and interspaced between here is artillery fragment. And based on the fact that Lieutenant McGill incurred 0 casualties, we can deduce that the artillery likely fired on the ridge before Lieutenant McGill took his position. Additionally, the shells were on the eastern side of the ridge as opposed to the western side, as Stephen Crane notes. But the significance of the shells being on the eastern side is that this would say that the firing line was firing at the retreating Spanish, who retreated down this road and to the east. Third, the sheer lack of shells on the ridge indicates that the Marines were not in position for very long. Right here on the left side is a sample from the main effort in Captain Elliot's line, and as you can see, there's about 40 shells in one area. However, on the ridge, we only found about 3 shells at the largest deposit. Additionally, the slope of the terrain of the ridge, what that did is it was inhibited line of sight westward, so the Marines have only been able to see and fire the retreating Spanish to the east, because the westward they wouldn't have been able to provide crossfire because of the fact that the terrain was sloped in such a way that they wouldn't be able to accurately fire. So here's an alternate view of the battlefield. So this comes from the Heliograph station to the north and from an elevated point of view. On the red line here, we have Lieutenant McGill's line, and the yellow line, we have Captain Elliot and Lieutenant Lucas's line, the main effort. As you can see, the Spanish retreated eastward down the road, and Lieutenant McGill, while taking, the orange dots indicate naval gunfire support, and he fired eastward at the Spanish retreat. So this is another view. So Lieutenant McGill's line was on this ridge here. This is a 1988 monument to Sergeant Quick, but we found shells starting a little bit to the north, up along this ridge line, interspaced with artillery fragments. And this was the southeastern part of the main effort on this ridge line right here. So, while this is all fascinating, this was only 1/3 of our intended research goals. The second of which pertained to the Heliograph station to the north, where Lieutenant McGill, after ascending the western slopes of the Heliograph station hill, captured the Heliograph station and descended southward along the ridge to where we just talked about. However, the Heliograph station, we don't know exactly where it was. So we needed to investigate the exact position of where this station was set up. And what we discovered is on this elevated area was that there was 2 hills where the Heliograph station may have been. And we didn't know which one it was. But however, based on primary source accounts, we were able to find key landmarks from on top of the hills and trace that back to view site from on top of the hill to determine which hill was most likely used as a heliograph station. So the main factors were locating High Cackle Point, McCulloch Hill, the Spanish position at the Hacienda, and Camp McCulloch. And using that, we were able to determine that it was the eastward higher hill as opposed to the westward lower hill. Now, when we came down from this hill, the descent, this was also controversial in historiography. So before Lieutenant McGill took his position on the ridge, he had to have somehow came down from the hill. So if you can see, following my pointer, there's a road right here that's modern accounts say that Lieutenant McGill took down to get to his position on the ridge. However, we don't believe that, and we don't buy that because of the fact that investigation of the road indicated that the road was a modern implementation pertaining to Cold War fighting positions and fortifications on top of the Heliograph station, which heavily disturbed the area. So, what that said is, Lieutenant McGill would not have taken a road that wasn't there in 1898. So what we did is we did the most logical thing Lieutenant McGill would have done, and we followed the most direct path down from the Heliograph station to the line of fire on the ridge. And what this also provided was cover. So if he had followed this proposed road that was not there until the late 1950s or 60s, he would have been completely exposed to the enemy the entire time he was moving. But this eastern side, this descent provided the cover he needed to sneak around to the bridge. So this is almost the second part of our research objectives. And we're missing the third area called the Crossroads. So this is the area that we heard about skirmishes from Captain before, and may have had fire on the June 14th in the morning before Lieutenant McGill advanced from the Crossroad to the Heliograph station. So we don't know what's there. And unfortunately, when we went over there to investigate what was actually going on and see if we could find any shells, we were hindered by the presence of wild dogs. And that was a bit of a scare. One of our members actually uprooted a tree as soon as he heard the barking. So that was a little frightful. So like I said, as we know, there were skirmishes there from June 11th to the 13th, and as well as possible fighting there on the 14th that we haven't heard about. So that would justify further research into that area, as we were not able to complete a third of our objectives. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Captain Stawnyczyj for remarks and questions.
Thank you very much. So joining us here also is Midshipman McIsaac. She was one of the midshipmen that was out on the excavation with us too, or the survey. And with that, do you have anything that you want to say? No. No? You're good? Awesome.
You covered it all.
And questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, just want to go back to so the U.S. Navy ship, was that sort of just south, was it down there at the,
It was in this area right in there.
It's not that thing.
No, this is just indicating that this is
Like
what these are, naval gunfire.
Okay.
So this is not the ship, it's just a
But
key.
it's somewhere there.
It's somewhere here, probably around 2,000 yards maybe, 400 to 2,000 yards is what the different accounts that we've seen. It's a pretty wide range.
What was the signaling? Was it flag?
The signaling, I'm glad that you asked that, 'cause that's what the two Congressional Medal of Honor were issued for, was Sergeant Quick That's another debate, but that's not something that we were able to address during this talk. But Sergeant Quick came off the firing line and tied a neckerchief around his rifle and started signaling the USS Dolphin was signaling for it to shift its fire once Private Fitzgerald told it to initiate its fire. So that's what they were using. And in a rebuttal later for firing on a Marine position, Commander Lyon of the Dolphin said that he couldn't see the flag, the blue flag, because of the blue sky in the background.
Yeah.
My question was kind of related to that. I mean, were there shells from the Dolphin mixed in with the Marine shells? Is there any fragments left?
Well, that's what you're saying is there's shell casings. So you have basically what you look on the table is some of the artifacts that we had brought back, and you're able to see that there's 6mm Navy Lee rifle, which was the standard infantry rifle that the Marines were using. So you see shell casings from that, but you also see fragments from naval gunfire intermixed within that line. And that's why if they didn't take any casualties, the amount of fragments that you see interspersed between the shell casings says, well, if there was someone at this point at this time, someone would have sustained some type of casualties from this.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sure.
On that map, what are the little green?
This is the path that the midshipmen, they decided to use every 10 yards. What we were doing is the transect, so we marked them every 10 yards. And
Those are survey marks.
these are marks, and the guidance was pick something new and different. And this was definitely new and different. Yes, sir.
What does it mean when you say McGill encouraged no casualties?
Incurred.
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 I thought I heard encouraged. Okay. Old vet ears. Never mind.
Yes, sir.
Was there any physical evidence of the heliograph station that you were able to find, or was it really just kind of looking at those other high points in the geographic vicinity?
Well, for the heliograph station, what made it difficult was there was actually a tank position built in there and bunkers that were built in during the Cold War. So to reinforce all that, they brought in extra gravel, and you can see where the road was actually raised higher. But one thing we did find was a Winchester 2520 shell. And what we know about the 2520 is that it was designed in 1895, and it was from a lever action rifle. So it's maybe period, but is it someone hunting? Is it military? We just don't know. So you can't say that this is it based off of just the 2520 shell.
Yeah.
Yes.
Are there any contemporary photographs that you were able to compare to modern day? And this whole question of roads and terrain and everything, are there any daguerreotypes?
No, the only photographs that exist are actually of McCulloch Hill from Guantanamo Bay onto the hill and of the hill itself.
So looking from the other side.
It is basically most of the photos here, if we can, basically are from here,
From over there.
looking this way, and on the hill, basically looking back out. It's like the Army and Marines were taking pictures of each other,
But
as
not-
were the
not
Marines
over
and the
what
Navy.
Hacienda was, or there's no
The
photography
Hacienda,
down there.
no, there's not. There's an artist, a modern artist rendition of what they think,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
How many days were you able to spend on the survey?
we were there from the 29th, and we returned back on the 10th of June. So we left the 29th of June and returned back on the 10th of July. So it wasn't that long. And what we really wish we could have done was investigated that road because through Happy Valley. And what's important about that is if that was the main avenue of approach, this was a hacienda where the Marines landed was a fishing village. So you have years of use, and who knows what else that you could come across there from not just from 1898, but from other eras as well. Yes, sir.
Can you explain how a heliograph works?
Sure. A heliograph is basically signaling using mirrors. So it's kind of like mirror Morse code is what they would do. So that's why you have to, so you're using the sun. So it's really early wireless technology.
Solar.
Solar, it's green.
When does the wild dogs come with the equation, and were there any strategies for combating them? Or were you armed? Any intel on that?
I had a Gerber and a lot of motivation. No, and basically what we were told was they'll leave you alone eventually, so don't worry about them. That was the guidance. But that was on the first day that we were there, and I had to weigh, the benefits, and having a midshipman getting a series of rabies vaccines on the first day for the rest probably would cancel any further research in Guantanamo Bay. So.
Did you get a look at the hacienda? Was there anything left of it?
There's some of it left. It's actually right where this is marked. There's some remnants of it. And we were told to stay out of it because we were told to stay out. That wasn't part of our scope. And Hannah definitely made sure that we stayed out of it. So it's there. Part of it's still there, but because again, we were definitely prior to going, we had to specifically state what areas that we were going to research, and we had to stay within those. So I couldn't go Leroy Jenkins my way over to like different areas. Yes, ma'am.
I said that there's a lot of underwater archaeology. Do you see any divers when you work there? Is that something that happens a lot? I heard there's a lot of artifacts in the water.
There are a lot of, as a matter of fact, a lot of the artifacts are going to be kind of along this area because there used to be a barracks there. So you find a lot of old china plates. There was actually a bathtub when we were out there on the beach, so out in the water. So there. But on the serious note, there's they found some old guns out in there. So, but I didn't see anyone conduct any archaeology in the water at the time I was there, ma'am. Yes, sir.
So on that map, could you just show the perimeter of the current Guantanamo?
Sure, it goes along this way, right up through, it goes a little bit off of the page, kind of over into here. So it's pretty much right through here.
So it covers almost the half, the lower half of what we're looking for.
It does.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, no, I pointed too low. It's all up, you can see the line right through here.
Oh, it's there.
And it comes on an angle there, right up through there.
Oh, I do, yeah. I can see.
So it comes close to Boca Raton City and Camanera City.
Oh, okay, great.
And on another note, in typical fashion, when the battalion did return, they came back from parading and they were disbanded all over again to start from scratch for the next emergency that should come up.
Who were the two commandants over there? Future commandants?
It was Captain Elliot, who was charged of the main effort. He became the Commandant of the Marine Corps right after Haywood. And then right after General Lejeune, it was Wendell Neville. And Wendell Neville was the platoon commander during the battle. And as a matter of fact, his accounts, as well as Lieutenant Ingate, talk about having several skirmishes in the Crossroads area, which gives us the information of, hey, there's something going on here that we really didn't know about. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Is there any plan to do a follow-up? I was kind of like, she asked about underwater archaeology. I mean, you guys, I mean, sometimes these joint missions with NOAA and their Naval History and Heritage Command sometimes to see what else is underneath and maybe near on the coastline. But
Oh, honestly, with the battle, since most of it's on the land and the shells were striking the land, I don't know what you'd get from the underwater. Or maybe I'm missing something. I don't know.
just curious.
Yeah, I know it's a sea turtle nesting area here at that beach too, so we couldn't use that.
Is that the reason why you had to stay out of there?
No, it wasn't in the scope of our search, and it's already been. They don't want us. I don't know. We just told stay out of there. I say, aye, sir.
Is there an unexploded ordnance problem in Guantanamo or not?
We had to mention it. That was in our ORM because you can't go in without that. But if we found any, we were supposed to, inform the range personnel there because there's some magazines in that area. So it was definitely a controlled area because of the magazines that are there. So we couldn't show certain pictures that we want to because it is considered like a classified area because of those magazines. So, and then just to reiterate just one point on this, from this hill, this is from Hill 350, the first hill that they had climbed. And basically the Marine line, this would have been so here's the hacienda right down in there. That's where it is, and the water would be right over here, if that kind of paints a better picture for you. So here's the hacienda, and this is the route, the line of the Spanish retreat. And we know that that's the line of the Spanish retreat because, well, that's the only place to go. The terrain hasn't changed from 1898 to today. So what was a valley and a navigable area then was the same as a valley and navigable area today. So I think the terrain was definitely a huge appreciation. Weather and avenues of approach and cover and concealment, all those things were evident on the archaeological survey and where to look. And if you want to, there's some artifacts that we brought back there on the table there. Yes, sir.
You said there were two Medal of Honor winners?
Yes, sir. It was Private Fitzgerald and Sergeant Quick. Private Fitzgerald originally stood up with to signal the Dolphin to begin firing, and then Sergeant Quick signaled the Dolphin to shift firing because of the hazard to McGill's troops. And Sergeant Quick, he became a sergeant major, and he fought in the First World War as well too. if there's no other questions, you're more free to take a look at artifacts or just ask anything else on the side. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank Captain Stawnyczyj and Midshipman Walton for an excellent presentation. Not only a really good look at a battle that we know very little about, frankly, but also a great look at the way that historians perform their craft. Right? The historical methodology of adding to the narrative by asking important historical questions and then finding ways to answer them. Fascinating stuff. So thanks, guys, and thanks to everyone for coming.